Howdy there, friends, family, adversaries, ladies, gentlemen, and non-binary folks. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Riley Constantine, and today we are talking about WandaVision, which is the recently released Marvel TV show on Disney+. It should be a fun episode, but before we dive into the video proper, I do have a few announcements. Firstly, content warning. Trauma is a fundamental part of WandaVision's narrative and thematic core, so it stands to reason that this episode will cover topics like trauma, grief, and PTSD. So if you have experienced trauma in the past and don't really want to deal with that topic today, you might want to skip this video. Secondly, this video does not have any spoilers for WandaVision. While I plan on going into spoilerific detail in future videos, this first video won't have any spoilers in it. So if you still want to watch WandaVision, this video won't spoil anything. Promise. And thirdly, this video was requested by patron David Devlin, so make sure you thank them in the comments. Just do it, damn it. Poorly coping with traumatic events is the unique thematic point of WandaVision. While this Disney Plus Marvel show features many similarities to other Marvel Cinematic Universe productions, the show created its own narrative identity by discreetly slipping in recurring themes regarding the nature of trauma and grief, essentially utilizing its costumed superhero presentation as a facade to hide deeper subject matter, much like how Everclear is obfuscated by apple cider. Sure, the show embodies many aspects of the Marvel brand, i.e. it has superpowered battles, humorous one-liners, and a visually interesting color palette, but, and please forgive the pun, WandaVision has more going on behind the scenes than it is letting on. Despite being a part of the biggest pop culture brand in modern Hollywood history, WandaVision is about people coping with grief, loss, and trauma, which are real, complicated, and relatable themes for many people, myself included. Grieving the death of a loved one, being impacted by the memories of abuse, growing up in an unaccepting environment, or dwelling on internalized self-loathing is a lot to contend with emotionally, and dealing with these traumatic events can be difficult. In fact, they can be so overwhelming that the act of coping with them can be handled in an unhealthy way that is toxic to those around us. Our trauma can lead to substance abuse, cause us to drift away from our family and friends, and affect day-to-day actions like skipping school, work, or important social gatherings, which I've been there. It is not a good time. 1.5 stars. And with that, trauma can be a very touchy and hard discussion point with a lot of baggage behind it, kind of like my relationship with my dad. And when it comes to WandaVision, the show needed to tread carefully in order to portray this volatile emotional state in a positive manner. The show needed to balance the lighthearted, goofy nature of the Marvel Cinematic Universe with the raw emotional pain associated with traumatic experiences. And in order to be among the best MCU adventures, WandaVision needed to accurately portray trauma, which the show does to decent but unfortunately mixed results. Like, don't get me wrong, WandaVision is a solid show. Its core cast of characters is likable, and it has a certain charm, but with that said, it is far from great. Hell, it's probably even a stretch to call it good, mostly because the on-screen action and the lighthearted nature of the MCU just don't mesh well with the darker and more personal themes of the narrative. Sure, other Marvel projects have grappled with complex subject matter in the past, but those stories worked in tandem with the MCU's genre style rather than contradict it like WandaVision. And this contradiction is made abundantly clear by WandaVision's core story, which is set after the events of Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame and stars the superpowered Wanda Maximoff and the cybernetic Vision as they settle down in their new home in suburbia. And as the show gets moving, the duo are presented as a typical married couple, albeit one with superpowers. They engage in married couple banter, go to work, and gossip with their neighbors just like a normal family would. But with that said, something is clearly amiss. Despite its idyllic nature, the reality in WandaVision feels and looks off, mostly because Wanda's and Vision's world is fluid and stylistically exists and shifts between different eras of American sitcoms. Some WandaVision episodes are in black and white, like a 50s and 60s television program. Some of them are comparatively modern mockumentaries in the same vein as The Office, and most of the episodes feature laugh tracks, which in my humble opinion is the most horrid concept that television has ever introduced to American audiences. Like seriously, don't tell me when to laugh. I will laugh on my own time and giggle like a little girl when I want to. I don't have a problem, but the American sitcom nonsense isn't the only issue, seeing as Vision should be deceased. Back in Avengers Infinity War, Vision was murdered by Thanos, yet in WandaVision, he seems fairly spry for a dead guy, and quite a lively presence for a man who was noticeably not dead. And in WandaVision, Vision's return, as well as the American sitcom aesthetic that WandaVision takes place in, is not questioned. In fact, Wanda and Vision have no real memory of events prior to the start of the show, and they view the odd occurrences surrounding them as part of everyday life. Yes, really. Despite their faulty memory, their noticeably black and white made-for-TV world, how it is the 1950s, and the fact that there's a social safety net, nothing is amiss to them. It is all normal.
Is your husband tired of you his toast?
As you can see, WandaVision has an odd narrative, but it is not too out there in the grand scheme of things. The show is simultaneously inventive with its television sitcom world, all while also being yet another safe comic book actioner existing within the parameter of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. While WandaVision uses its creative concept to tackle darker subject matter regarding grief and trauma, WandaVision is quite a typical MCU adventure when it is all said and done. The show often doesn't stray too far from the lighthearted, quippy comedy and fantastical action that defines movies and shows within the MCU, and as a result, WandaVision is bold yet familiar. Weird, but not to the point of alienation. It truly tries to have it both ways in terms of being an artistic creation and yet another Marvel product. But at the end of the day, it is still another MCU show with a plethora of Easter egg references to other Marvel properties, superheroes fighting supervillains, and some solid one-liners. Even though it attempts to walk the line, WandaVision honestly does not balance its deeper creative goals with its blockbustery presentation all that well. In fact, WandaVision's ties to the broader MCU is a detriment to the more mature story it is otherwise trying to tell. Even though yes, the Marvel Cinematic Universe and its brand of superhero genre pulp has its merits, the MCU traits within WandaVision are a hindrance at times, because the show is at its best when it is mysterious and plays up its unique story concept rather than overly explaining how this is affecting the continuity. See, in the earlier episodes where everything is still a big old mystery, the show has an undercurrent of horror and suspense that befits its themes regarding grief and trauma. Behind all the laugh tracks, the idyllic sitcom Americana, the wholesome supporting characters, the various hijinks, and the great comedic timing of its two leads, there really is something disturbing at play behind the scenes. In the earlier parts of the season, there is an unspoken tension brimming beneath the surface, which really draws the viewer into WandaVision's world. But it is a tone that is sadly blunted as more MCU stylistic furnishings invade WandaVision's story as the show goes on. Starting in the 4th episode, we meet a bunch of supporting characters from past Marvel Cinematic Universe productions like Jimmy Woo, Darcy, and Monica Rambeau, and while they are fun characters, they do devalue WandaVision's overall narrative momentum, because they are representative of what's wrong with the series. See, WandaVision was terrific at being a mystery that slowly revealed the frightening implications of the show's cheery world, but starting from the 4th episode onward, WandaVision receives an exposition dump that dilutes and tonally contradicts its otherwise deeper messaging, and sadly, the show never fully recovers from this. Even though the show's heart is consistently in the right place and tries to convey a deeper and more interesting narrative, there's so much MCU bullshit clogging each episode that the well-intentioned themes of grief, trauma, and loss become tonally muddled, which honestly really sucks to say because I genuinely enjoy the continuity of the MCU, but not in this instance, not when it undermines the narrative like it does here. Even though WandaVision is solidly enjoyable and fine on its own merits, the show really could have been better if it was more focused on the characters and gave less of a damn about the broader MCU and the lighter tonal shifts that are synonymous with that property. While WandaVision has a good message about grief, a cool retro visual style, and fun characters, it is held back by many of the inherent franchisal trappings of the MCU, especially as the show goes on. Where early episodes were mysterious, later episodes are overly explained. Where WandaVision originally had a distinct style, it would later transition back to less interesting MCU furnishings. Where the earlier parts of the season had more narrative and thematic weight, later episodes were unintentionally cornball at times. Where the show initially had a clear artistic vision, WandaVision's message ultimately did not come in all that clearly. Alright, that was another video. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like rating and subscribe to my channel. Consider donating to my Patreon so I can keep doing this for a living, because it's fun. Also, speaking of Patreon, I want to thank my high-tier patrons in Slasher Fails, Mom, David Devlin, and Miles Nelson. Thank you so much for supporting what I do. Love y'all.